In their first responses to the cabinet reshuffle, ministers affected by the changes say they are looking forward to their new appointments, but are aware of the challenges they face. When incoming Health Minister Ong Ye Kung was asked whether his departure would disrupt transport initiatives, like talks on possible travel bubbles with other countries, Mr. Ong assured Singaporeans that work will continue under the new Transport Minister, S. Iswaran.
I think what we have put in place is I've explained in Parliament before, the whole idea is what can we do to mitigate the risks such that we can replace SHN with other risk mitigating measures, and we have identified them, whether it's testing, bubble wrap travel, vaccination, partnering safe countries, and I think so long as you know these principles, you know how to design a scheme. And Hong Kong is still on the table.
Deputy Prime Minister Heng Swee Keat also commented on the cabinet reshuffle in a Facebook post. He says incoming Finance Minister Lawrence Wong will have the big task of continuing to invest for the long term while maintaining fiscal discipline. He also says the reshuffle will give the 4G team the opportunity to work more closely in their new capacities. Mr. Heng hopes that Singaporeans will give them their fullest support as they work together to emerge stronger from the COVID-19 crisis. On his new position, the Finance Ministry, Minister Lawrence Wong says he is mindful of the responsibilities his new portfolio holds as Singapore grapples with a weak economy and many businesses and individuals still require support. But he points out that opportunities exist, even in the midst of crisis. Finance, he says, will be a key enabler to seize these opportunities and advance the well-being of Singapore and Singaporeans. Also posting on Facebook, Minister Chan Chun Sing. He says his goal as Education Minister will be to enable Singaporeans to realise their aspirations, no matter their starting circumstances in life, just like how he himself was able to do. And in turn, he hopes that they will pay it forward to the next generation. Incoming Manpower Minister Dr. Tan See Leng is also mindful of the heavy responsibilities that lie ahead. He says the public health situation in the migrant worker dormitories is an important area that he will continue to keep a close eye on, even as he focuses on helping Singaporean workers get back on their feet. Now, for more analysis, we're joined by Associate Professor Eugene Tan from the Singapore Management University. Eugene, good to have you on again. Firstly, overall, major reshuffling going on. How surprised are you, and what do you make of the reasons cited by Prime Minister Lee at making the wide-ranging changes at this point?
Yeah, good evening, Steve, Telly. I'm surprised. I was expecting some adjustments as a result of Deputy Prime Minister Heng stepping aside. And it's also been just a mere 9 months, since several of the cabinet ministers took on their new ministerial portfolios. But of course, when we take into account what Prime Minister Lee had said, about in the midst of the pandemic, it probably wasn't prudent to have new ministers, in the frontline ministries, and also, the opportunity now that, with TPM Heng stepping aside, this is an opportunity to reshape, the cabinet. So I think all in all, we are probably seeing, the full suite of changes, and I think, this is something that we will see the ministers moving forward, with more vigor now that the changes have been set. And they have lots to do, in the months and years ahead.
So, Eugene, of course, I have to ask you, the top question on everybody's mind, who is the new frontrunner to become the next PM, or is it too soon to tell?
It's too soon to tell. I think in the end, PM Lee was very careful not to give anything away, but we must also remember, the 4G ministers will still need some time, to decide who among them, would be, the first among equals, the Prime Minister in waiting. So when you look at the lineup today, I would say that, the race is still pretty much wide open. PM is, of course, very mindful, to let the 4G leadership the time and space that they need to make this very important decision. But when you look at, the sort of various assignments, including the weighty ones, I would say that, the front runners have not changed. So I think they still remain very much, the trio of Minister Chan Chun Sing, Ong Ye Kung and Lawrence Wong in alphabetical order. And so I think, that there's much to go. I think here, we're not really seeing, these ministers being put to the test. I think it's really now, an important period, for the ministers, to develop greater understanding of each other, and for them to, come to a consensus on who they think among them would be best placed, to lead the team. And so, much as, there's been a lot of speculation, on whether this lineup is going to give us some telltale signs. I think, there's certainly none at all.
Well, let's focus in on some of the candidates that you mentioned in no particular order. Mr. Lawrence Wong is the new finance minister, and Mr. Chan Chun Sing taking over him at the education ministry. How are you reading into their new appointments?
Well, Mr. Wong is very much, the natural choice, as PM described it. It's intuitive, right? He has been the second minister at the finance ministry since 2016, and prior to that, he was on the board of the Monetary Authority of Singapore, Singapore's de facto central bank. And so if you're looking for a seamless transition, a minister who can hit the ground running, then I think, Mr. Lawrence Wong fits the bill very nicely. And certainly, his appointment as finance minister certainly reflects PM's confidence and trust in his ability. And certainly, when we look at the sort of agenda, that is at the finance ministry, we're looking at the need for fiscal discipline. At the same time, with growing fiscal demands, there is also the GST hike, which will probably happen in the next couple of years. So I think when you look at Mr. Lawrence Wong, I don't think his appointment should cause any particular surprise. But we should also not read too much into it. I don't think it at all suggests, that he is in the lead, and I don't think Mr. Wong, is of that view either. When you think about Mr. Chan Chun Sing, who now steps into his shoes at the education ministry, it is significant. I think if you look at Mr. Chan's predecessors, they were Mr. Lawrence Wong, Mr. Ong Ye Kung, and Mr. Heng Swee Keat. So we have, the leading ministers, in the 4G leadership, all serving at the Ministry of Education. And I think this is where, the importance that, the government places on education. And when we look at Mr. Chan, I think he will be very well placed, to leverage, on his time, his experience in NTUC, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, to have, a good understanding, of what would be needed, to ensure that Singaporeans will be able to continue to have good jobs. But not only that, that education is not just about examinations, but it's also about people being able to unleash their full potential and lead fulfilling lives. And I think education will play that very instrumental role. So I see Mr. Chan as again broadening his diverse portfolio, and I think certainly it also reflects the endorsement that PM has of him.
So, Eugene, another notable move in this time of pandemic, Mr. Ong Ye Kung, moving to the health ministry just after less than a year as transport minister, not to mention that he'll also be the new co-chair of the COVID-19 task force. What do you think these new roles for him?
Well, when you look among the front runners, Mr. Ong Ye Kung has the least cabinet experience, having been elected only in 2015. So in a sense, perhaps you could look at, Prime Minister Lee as trying to accelerate, his exposure. And now that the pandemic, is much better under control, we're not in the thick of it, although we're still not out of it. I think PM felt that it is time, for a change, because Mr. Gan Kim Yong has been helming the health ministry for 10 years. And so the need for a strong leader at the health ministry, because this is not going to be the only pandemic. The World Health Organization has said that, there will be disease X. Essentially, we're entering a period where pandemics, could be more regular features. So this is also, in a way to expose Mr. Ong Ye Kung. And of course, in his role as the health minister, he will co-chair the multi-ministry task force, that leads, the government's response to COVID-19. And so it'll be interesting to look at the dynamics between Mr. Ong Ye Kung and his co-chair, Mr. Lawrence Wong. And really, I think, they will be the face of the 4G leadership, together with Mr. Chan Chun Sing, how they deal with public concerns, in a time of pandemic, how do they manage, public expectations. And certainly, Mr. Ong Ye Kung brings with him, a rich body of new ideas, that boldness of vision, and of course, the innovation, in terms of approaches, that we have come to identify with him in education, as well as the short period that he has, at the Transport Ministry.
Now, there are changes involving two ministers at the forefront of Singapore's COVID-19 fight. Health Minister Gan Kim Yong will head to the Trade and Industry Ministry, and Manpower Minister Josephine Teo will be the new Communications and Information Minister. What do you make of those changes, given that the pandemic is still an ongoing concern?
Well, I think, PM has certainly taken the view that, Mr. Gan leaves a very strong system, a strong institution with good processes and policies, which Mr. Ong Ye Kung, as the incoming health minister, can build on. PM obviously recognizes, trade and industry as being a very important ministry, particularly when you're looking at not just the pandemic, right, in terms of ensuring that supply lines, continue to be accessible. But when you look at the post-pandemic landscape, it is about economic recovery, and the need for Singapore, because of our heavy reliance on trade and investments, for the Ministry of Trade and Industry, to be helmed by an experienced and reliable minister. And given Mr. Gan's record, at MOH, I don't see how investors, would feel, that Singapore, in terms of its trade and industry policies, will be any weaker. I think if anything, Mr. Gan will build on what his predecessors have done at the ministry, and he will certainly continue to play that prominent role. After all, he's the only third-generation minister, that moved, and I think it reflects, the sort of stability and strength, that he would bring to his new ministry. When we look at Mrs. Josephine Teo, she completes 3 years at the Ministry of Manpower. Certainly a very demanding and challenging past year. In light of the massive outbreak of infections, in the dormitories, the situation has significantly improved, and PM Lee has determined that it is time, for Mrs. Teo, to move on, to new challenges at the Ministry of Communications and Information. And she takes on also, other responsibilities, such as the minister in charge of the Smart Nation initiative. So I think in a way, PM is saying, notwithstanding, some of the difficult moments in the past year, his confidence in Mrs. Teo remains strong, and so now moving her on, to new challenges.
All right, Eugene, just very quickly, these changes, what do they tell us about the priorities for the government and PAP?
I'll tell you, the priorities remain very much unchanged. It is really the focus, on the pandemic. And I think when you look at PM being alone at a press conference, he was essentially indicating it's business as usual. We are still fighting the crisis of a generation. He realizes this is a very stern test, not just for the government, but also for the 4G leadership. And so, even as we now have become rather concerned about the leadership window and succession, for him, PM is indicating that priorities remain keeping Singapore safe in ensuring that we are well placed, well poised, for a strong recovery, when the pandemic is over. And I think when you look at those priorities being taken care of, I think the leadership renewal and succession will be in a very good position.
Right, always good chatting with you, Associate Professor Eugene Tan there from the Singapore Management University.